Hello and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on shipping software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, your host, and you're listening to episode 7 of season 2. Today, I'm joined by Cyrus Radfar, CPO of Rollbar. Cyrus, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rob. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you. And I mentioned this before we got started, but at CircleCI, we've been using Rollbar for longer than I've been at the company, which is a pretty long stretch at this point. So y'all have had a very long journey and been involved in some things that I care a lot about. As you know, we're spending this season thinking about failure and learning from failure. And, I think Rollbar as a product sort of epitomizes that in the sense that, I'm effectively capturing data from things that I didn't expect to happen and under conditions that I would consider to be failure. I mean, they're literally software failures to some degree, right? And then using that in some way to learn and improve my product and build from it. So it's a little less, cultural, but I'm sure it rolls up to cultural very, very quickly. So I'm super excited to kind of dive into all the things that you've learned about your customers and about helping people get better at delivering software. So let's take the software delivery angle for a second. Like, as you think about the place of Rollbar, of capturing exceptions and building from that in the cycle of software delivery, how do you think about the kind of focus or role of Rollbar tools like it in in delivering, in helping you deliver better and helping you deliver faster?
I think, well, first of all, thank you. It's awesome when I get to meet people who are users and who are also kind of understand the problems so well that we're trying to face. I've only been at Rollbar a few months, and I think it's amazing how many folks precede me and already kind of are part of the cult, saying, "Hey, this is awesome," folding me into their understanding of what it means to them. Part of what I kind of think is special about the space and about kind of working with developers, as we both do, is the fact that as a persona or constituency to serve, it's such an interesting group that's constantly evolving and changing. And I think part of that change is effectively, and that evolution, that constant evolution is what makes Rollbar necessary. It makes Circle necessary. It's the fact that everything is constantly moving and changing and breaking. And that's something really important to the process, is accepting that everything you create is meant to be sunset and destroyed. And I think that, to me, like, existentially, I love that about Rollbar. I love that about software. I love that about product. That, whatever you create, no matter how much you love it, you know for sure, if you've been in the game long enough, that 3 years from now you're going to think you're an idiot. You're going to look back at yourself and be like, that was so wrong. But you were all right at the moment. Mm-hmm. So I think Rollbar sits in that place where it's kind of a constant reminder that things are changing. And I like that. That was kind of a little roundabout answer. Sorry. Well,
I think that's a really great perspective on the, the name, first of all. Let's just talk about the name for a second. Because, as I said, when I joined CircleCI, we were already using Rollbar. I had used other similar products and was already in the, how did anyone live without this kind of tooling mentality. But the name is fantastic, just in terms of the sense of, an accident is going to happen. Let me make sure that I'm as protected as possible, when that occurs, sort of thing. And I think that, as we talk about moving quickly, having that confidence that comes from knowing, if I do make a mistake, right? If I code something incorrectly, if it ends up in production and someone starts seeing errors or errors that we hadn't anticipated, I'm going to know about it. I'm going to be able to respond to it. is the thing that, is one of the things that allows you to move quickly. And to your point, this constant evolution, like a thing that I build today, 3 years from now is going to feel irrelevant. Like A, I'll probably think I didn't do a very good job, but whatever. B, it's going to feel irrelevant because I've moved on. The world has changed. This kind of tooling enables it. Absolutely. And I think it's a very unique thing about software delivery, right? If you think about many other forms of engineering, I don't design a bridge. Well, no one lets me design bridges. But if I were to design bridges, if I were to design bridges, I wouldn't be designing them thinking, yeah, this will be good enough for 3 years, and then it'll fall down and we'll build a new one, sort of thing. So it is a very, very different perspective, and yeah, I think it enables that. So as you mentioned the constituency, right? Just this kind of overall community, how we think about delivery and evolution. Is that consistent? Like as you look at, you obviously have a particular view through your customer base at Rollbar, and you mentioned lots of people already being on board, but are you still finding pockets of the industry or areas where in software development, getting people to this notion that something's really going to go wrong? Like we all know it's going to go wrong. Let's talk about how to deal with it when it happens and be comfortable with that versus let me explain to you that you probably actually will ship something bad into production. Like, is that an effort that you're having to make?
I think it's a function of adoption. And what I mean is like, you can track anything. Like you could have Google Analytics, you could have Rollbar, you could have all these different things, but if you're not looking at it, then do you really accept what it's saying? Are you listening to the channel? Are you actually accepting it? So I think there's the one step of like someone in a company, will leverage a tool and say, we need this. But the culture that accepts the need for Rollbar is the one that adopts it truly. And it says we're comfortable looking at all this because it's sometimes terrifying. You're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things happening. And it's hard because you have to introspect and be like, no, there's nothing wrong with us. This is software development. And I think that adoption, as I said, as a function is related directly to that. Is the culture accepting failure? Truly. There's like someone who meta is like, this is the right thing to do. We should be paying for this. And then there's are we actually using it? So I think as we all know, I mean, as you go through whether it's leadership or kind of the IC track in engineering, like trying new things is hard and scary. And I think Rollbar usage is one thing to look at. The other is are you able to do new things? Are people comfortable trying new things? Are ideas getting stifled very early? To kind of more generally say, are we building a culture that accepts failure as part of the equation, accepts this as part of the journey?
Well, I love that notion of the culture of accepting failure because I feel like, I don't know if everyone's going to believe me, but I guess I get to decide on the show. Like, not adopting something like Rollbar is basically just pretending you're not failing. It's not actually not failing, right? It's just we're gonna be blind or sort of sweep under the rug the issues that our customers are seeing, or maybe are getting out into production environment. Versus, let's at least surface all that stuff and we'll have a chat about it. Even if we said, you know what, okay, we see that failure. It's not interesting. It's not important enough. It's not a priority. Like, at least we're having an open conversation versus saying, oh, we don't want to know about that. If something breaks in our production environment, we don't want to know. Seems like such a bizarre outcome. But at the same time, not everyone in the world is doing this. And I wonder how much of that is, I guess, acceptance of failure, that failure is a thing that's happened and we can take that and learn from it and that's valuable, or just even knowledge that it's possible. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there a subset of folks that you talk to who were like, oh, we would totally be using this if we had known it existed? I mean, it feels like this type of capability has been around for so long at this point.
I'm not on the sales side, so I don't get in all those conversations. I would say most of the product folks I work with, especially being kind of most of my community is kind of Silicon Valley based, is relatively forward thinking. I don't have a lot of very like big, huge company enterprise folks that I get, grow with as in my role. So I think I have a pretty intense bias towards the future. So I think, and also Rollbar does. So like I would say that, I mean, maybe not anymore, but early on there was definitely a lot of education in the process of saying you need Rollbar. Here's why. People had to understand that like you're competing, like, because there's a point where there's a time where people thought we were competing with logs. But that I think now it's like, there's actual people have are a little more sophisticated. So I think the problem is known. I think the hard part right now is for everybody is just managing. Engineers are expensive. Some would say it's hard to maintain and keep a great culture, and there's an aversion to throwing a lot of bugs at people because you think it's going to diminish them. So you don't want to create an ecosystem of like, here's all you have to do is bugs all day. So I think there's a not a counter, but there's a balance. People are having a hard time striking between our feature work, our bug work, and there's an argument that isn't the like we don't accept failure, which is we want to think about the future and we're prioritizing that over things that seems to be a competitor of sorts for attention. Which it's almost like Jira is out there kind of competing with Rollbar some days and saying like, which one should we be in, Rollbar or Jira? And we're trying to say be in both. So, or Shortcut for that matter.
So, I'm trying to. That's so fascinating. I would not have thought of those. I guess I would not have thought of them as direct competitors. And I see where you're getting to.
Oh, they're not. This is the business sense, but they are from an attention standpoint.
From an attention, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
I have so much time to spend on a daily basis, determine it. And I need to determine what I'm going to work on.
Yeah.
But I think that at least my mental model, and I'd love to get into this a little bit. Like I think about Rollbar sort of unhandled exceptions as a tool to expose something we didn't actually predict, right? Under these circumstances, this particular user, this data set, this particular browser, I mean, it could be anything, right? And ideally, I can use the analytics from a tool like Rollbar to identify what that is. Under these circumstances, the product doesn't do the thing that we thought it was going to do. It doesn't behave the way that, not even the way that the user expected, it just doesn't even behave correctly. Like it wasn't implemented correctly. Hard to differentiate, and so if it's not doing that, like moving on to the next thing just feels odd, right? Whereas if I feel good, like it's doing all the things that we expected it to do, now I feel comfortable building the next thing because I'm avoiding the interrupts. Like keeping that in check feels like actually a way to move faster versus something to be avoided in order to move faster, if that makes sense. I'm curious, as you think about that culturally, you made a few references to culture as you talk to orgs that are doing this successfully. Is there a sense of that? Like, this is something that I keep clean effectively. There's some good hygiene here because that allows me to invest in the future and do it confidently instead of getting interrupted later.
There's an idea of kind of empower usage of Rollbar zeroing, which is kind of the act of trying to get to no rollbars that are visible in your item list under whatever the criteria you choose. And that is something we've seen significantly happier, more successful, deeper adoption across customers when they can get to that point where they're keeping that habit. And we're working in the product side to kind of say, like, how do we reinforce that behavior? How do we actually kind of take this organic thing that's happened and make it actually a part of our flows? I think in going back to kind of the attention economy effectively that we're all competing for, along with, I think I would think that you folks at Circle would have the same sort of, in a way, battle with every other observability tool. But I know you don't consider that, but from the analytics side of how the builds are doing, we're trying to look at where should we be focusing our time on, which of our builds should we be improving right now. And then we're also doing that across, name your multiple observability tools that we use that are looking at like every query in our system and everything. And it's the same people that have to decide, are we fixing the build? Are we fixing a query? Which one is more important? Developer experience internally, this tech debt over here. We're in the world that like I think the problem we all live in is, or the community we serve is completely overwhelmed with the question of what do I do next? Like, what is the thing I'm supposed to do next? Like, I have this new work, I have this other work, and we're all battling to figure out like what's the right thing to do next. And I feel like it's a battle amongst everyone.
I feel like it's a question of like, I want to call it the entry point, or like understanding your top level goal. Let's use that. I was about to make a really ridiculous software metaphor and I'm going to skip it. So if you understand your top level goal, then all of these tools should be in service of that, right? And I could optimize a build or go clean up some Rollbar or whatever, right? Go dig into some performance metrics on a query. But the question is, which one of those is having the most impact on my customer or on my business, right? So again, top level goal. If the thing that's impacting my customers the most is some unexpected errors, then I'm going to go dig into Rollbar, figure out why those things are happening and go fix those things. If it's the absence of some capability, then I'm going to work on that capability. But if I just look at all of those kind of raw inputs, like I go look in my metrics and in my observability tools and in my error handling tools and my build, there's always something that could be better, right? And so, of course, I'm going to be struggling to figure out where to focus. If I truly understand my top level goal, right? This is what I'm trying to do for the business. My customers are having a great experience right now. My developers are frustrated. Okay, let's talk about developer experience. Like, where are they getting stuck? Where are they burning time? How can we be more productive and then ship more value to our customers down the road? Great, that's something to focus on. My customers are all sad and my developers are happy. I probably have a different set of problems, right? Which thing am I going to go focus on? Maybe the reliability of my system is lacking, or I've got a bunch of unhandled exceptions and I should go dig into that, right? I think it is an interesting problem, and often I witness what you're describing, which is that like I've got all these different I'm an engineer sitting here trying to figure out what to do, and I've got all these different inputs. It's a sign that I don't have a greater sense of like what matters. Not like which of these inputs matters, but what's the thing that matters that we're trying to achieve, and then how can I use the data from these inputs to make sure that I'm achieving that? Does that make sense?
It does. I think you definitely. It's nice to have a strategy that everything can fall, or strategies that everything can fall into that you're feeding. I think absent that it is. I think the ecosystem has become quite overwhelming. Similar to like the social media ecosystem of like every single thing wants you to go check if you have a comment right now. You have to go do something back there, and it's like this like litter of cognitive load all over the place. I do think a category may exist soon that sits above every one of us, and tries to give folks almost the Hootsuite of sorts for all of the different dev tools that you use, that sits and says like, here's the actual most important notifications you need to manage right now.
Right. Well, I guess I don't, not facetiously as a CPO, I want to say that's product management I'll just stop there. Like, meaning as an engineer, right? Outside of interrupts, oh, this thing is broken, right? Customers are failing right now at this thing. Okay, we have some SLOs, or we have some reason to say we uphold this level of quality and we're going to go fix that thing because it's been instantly prioritized. But that's an agreement we made with our product group. Outside of that, being able to say, this is the impact that's having on our customers. We need to go save money here, drive revenue there, improve quality here. Like, there's all these inputs. And to me, that is what makes product management so valuable, is saying, okay, for the business, I sort of can see all these things coming in and then distill out, this is where we're going to focus our energy right now, right? This is where I'm not trying to dump it all on you. It just feels to me like the thing that I count on. If as an engineer,
I think it's fair to say, but what I'm saying is I don't think product management So for example, like if while an engineer is working all day, I'm assuming there's no one that can protect them from the fact that choose your product management tool, they're getting notified all day based on updates in there as everybody's working. Now they can avoid those updates and try to queue them, which would be great work habits to queue and manage in blocks, just like your email. But I would say less people do that based on response times. So I think there are some people who are really good at managing their focus time and some who aren't. But and I can tell product managers all day, don't post any comments during the workday, and post them in the evening and the morning as like because there is no way of it's funny. I was like, why doesn't any product management platform I've ever seen have a send it later? Because I want everything to be sent at the beginning of stand up. That's what I want. I want everything going out like 3 minutes before stand up. We open up stand up. Everyone sits for 5 minutes and reads your notifications. That would be glorious if they would just add that feature. Because it would create so much headspace. Because most of the stuff you don't need to worry about. I think. I don't know. I'm a big like focus nut. Like I think about that all the time because I think that's kind of at the most high level kind of product provides air cover, direction, and ideally creates as much space for focus as possible. And the tools make it hard sometimes because you can't stop them.
I love where we've ended up. And actually, I'm going to connect these a little bit. I mean, first of all, I have all desktop notifications turned off. None of them are valuable enough that I can't, or that it's worth distracting. That's my
interpretation. Now I know I don't respond to my texts.
That's exactly right. Well, I didn't say text, but all desktop notifications, because I don't want other systems deciding when I should, stop focusing, right? And I think if you I don't know if you subscribe to the David Allen school, like getting things done, but like taking all that stuff, being able to put it into an inbox and say, okay, it's prioritized and now I'm going to work on this stuff. It's interesting in terms of like when we talk about delivering, shipping fast, shipping confidently, being constantly interrupted is probably one of the biggest detriments to that, right? Whether it's, just your ability to retain, be in flow. It's like there's a lot going on there. And I do think consolidating that, you mentioned stand up, like checking in, saying, cool, we know what we're doing today. Let's go do that thing is great with a threshold for interrupt. And so it's interesting. It's interestingly in tension with kind of Rollbar 0, right? Every single thing that pops up, we're going to go deal with it. But I could consolidate those things at the end of the day and say, okay, nothing, one user had this experience. Could we fix that? Sure. Let's roll that in. Or a bunch of people hit this. Is that just a metric? Cool. Let's put that in. You could kind of manage those, but want the ability to say, oh, this looks like it's going somewhere bad. Like 10,000 of these just happened. That's unexpected. Something bad is happening in our system. How do we respond? But knowing what that threshold for interrupt is really interesting. I don't really know how to get past that. Like who owns that? How do you define it? But I think it's one of the places. I mean, certainly we know how to do that. I think we know how to do that in most of our tooling, right? Right? Like SLOs, whatever that might be.
Yeah,
like
I think outside of, I think and I haven't seen any studies, I'm sure there are, about how many interrupts or how many notifications developers are getting on an average given day and from what tools. Because
it's too many, whatever it is.
It's a lot. I mean, but then you have it like you have duplicated in Slack and email depending on how it's set up and all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, do you? I think the it's hard because when you're remote as well, there's probably a reasonable cohort that does not want to be completely quiet all day. And there's some who do. And I haven't figured out the magical way of managing the fact that like some people want to chat all day or are able to do that and function. And some people, their cache is dumped every time that someone messages them and they're like, I need 30 minutes to get back up and reboot. It's super hard.
Well, yeah, that's super fascinating. I'm on two kind of wavelengths at the moment, or
Am
two
I moving
paths.
too fast?
No, one is like this whole. I keep thinking like micro failure, right? Because we're talking about failure and learning from failure, and like the smallest things that show up in Rollbar, for example, or in our metric systems in other places, are interesting because it's useful data about our system that can teach us something. but they don't necessarily mean I got to drop what I'm doing and go do this thing right now instead, which is totally different from like a system just collapsed and it's causing like cascading failures through our entire environment, right? I should probably stop what I'm doing and go deal with that. Those things are few and far between, the latter. And then, with the point of focus, I think what's really interesting is, in a remote environment, I want to collaborate, I want to communicate with other people. But if I block out 3 hours and we get together and work on something together, then I've achieved that, but we've stayed focused on a task, which is, for me, at least personally, much more fulfilling than I dealt with this and dealt with that and dealt with this and dealt with that. Like people are kind of pinging me all over the place and I'm just jumping all over. And I get to the end of the day and I'm like, what have I done? Sort of thing. And so it's actually a really interesting question to balance between the desire for human interaction and collaboration, right? Particularly exasperated by more extreme remote distribution. We were always pretty distributed, but it's more extreme now. Versus interrupts that keep me from, actually being able to achieve the thing that I sat down to achieve. And so one of those is fulfilling and the other is kind of not. So how do you balance those?
You're getting a little deep for me here.
You started it. You got us here.
I know.
I was talking about production failures. So
I'm sorry. Go for it. No. I think I fall back on this kind of idea that the acceptance of, generally what I found works is just converting the word failure to opportunity. And amazingly, words matter. If you do it enough, you kind of brainwash yourself and quickly you're like, oh, those are all opportunities. These are all things that we could do to potentially improve it. Now, which ones do improve our system the best? And if you're like, Rollbar is a system that suggests opportunities to you to improve your system for free, or not for free, but are through your integrations. You don't have to think about it. You can quickly convert the tickets. I always look at it as saying, okay, well, let's get them into your product process as quickly as possible and figure out how to triage and manage the stuff. I think that's kind of where I try to get folks, is to not think of it as like as a battle between our features and our bugs, but like these are both improvements. And they're different. And in the end, a lot of times when you get a Rollbar, you're going to end up having to change some UX, whether it's in the back end or the way you interact with something or things of that sort. And you tell me, is it a UX improvement or a bug? I don't know. I've never figured it out yet.
I think the amount of time spent debating how to classify those is never worth it. That's what I'll say. So you mentioned converting failures to opportunities. I feel like that's going to be an excellent transition into our wrap up Red Build Rewind. We'd love to ask about an opportunity that you discovered at some point in your career that, that felt catastrophic at the time, but ended up actually teaching you something useful, maybe something that you carried on through your career and have continued to reference, or maybe not quite as impactful, but, something that maybe didn't feel quite so good in the moment, but ultimately you learned from.
Oh, I have too many. I'm trying to think. One of my favorites is an old one because it's, I don't know. When I was at Add This, or I think it was, and our CTO at the time, who I'll leave nameless, although it's very easy to find, had built a POC on the Berkeley DB for a backend processing system. And he asked me to check it out. It was a Java-based, basically, analytics system. So Add This is actually very similar architecturally than Rollbar, where there's a ton of sharing widgets all over the web. Share this button, and they're on I think at the time a few 100,000 sites at that time. It's at 14 million like by the time I left. But so all these sites were sending in data, and our backend was falling over at the time. So we were trying to figure out like how do we replace this MySQL backend. This is 2006, 7, 8. Anyway, so MySQL was falling over. It's like the day before the holidays. I think it's like we had like I remember there was like we had tickets for the whole company to go to the Wizards game, or not Wizards, Capitals. And I sat there, and the system was dying, and it was completely upside down. And I had a POC database processing server based in Berkeley that I was like, let me plug it in and see if it works. And so I spent 3 days straight kind of in the office, bringing the system back up with a new backend and clustering it. There was no clustering. It was a single server system, and like sharding it and writing that. And that was probably the most empowering moment in my entire career, but also the most terrifying 3 or 4 days, because I could not sleep. I could not really eat. The system was basically up and down the whole time, and I was the only person managing like tens of thousands of like, data was just streaming in. And thankfully we didn't lose anything. We reprocessed everything. It all went in the new system. But it's kind of I don't know. It was a geeky win, but it was one of the moments where I was kind of like felt most self-reliant at the end of it, if that makes sense. I have other business things, but I think those are much more like cerebral to me. This was like a visceral, like true battle against the internet.
I think the internet always wins in the end. But in this case, I guess at this particular case,
I survived. I survived long enough to get another system to replace this system, and then left. Yeah.
Well, I love that last point, right? Which is you had sort of a POC. You were able to take it and get through the storm, which got you long enough to then say, okay, actually, this is like fine, but we could do something better because we're going to grow again and grow again, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that folks struggle with under these circumstances is like looking for the perfect solution versus it's actually totally okay to get there incrementally. Like even if we build a thing, it took you 4 days, which sounds like an absolutely grueling 4 days, but 4 days to get something in place to sort of like get the breathing room or the headroom to then figure out, okay, what's the next step after this? And to have the wherewithal, I guess, to say, yeah, this isn't the end, right? This thing is going to collapse at the next step. So can I plan for that and be a little further ahead of it? I think is a great takeaway. And I mean, maybe I'm projecting, but the way you described it, it feels like a little bit of that is like sometimes these opportunities, trying to adopt your word, can be quite fun and fulfilling. And like, even if the thing you learned wasn't some great life lesson, like I had the opportunity to really do something and feel like I came out on top. Like that's actually really rewarding and ultimately gives you the confidence to take on more challenging things down the road, right?
Yeah, it definitely completely changed how I looked at development. And I think the incrementalism can be crippling if it's the end, but it's actually very empowering if you realize it's the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Love it. I'm going to write that one down. Everyone listening, please write that one down. That's where everyone needs to end up. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. As I mentioned, love the product. Glad to have you on board. I guess welcome. Not that I'm at Rollbar, but welcome to Rollbar. I'm sure we'll be in touch long after this. For everyone else who's listening, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the podcast, share it with your friends, subscribe on your favorite podcast provider. And if there's anyone you want us to talk to, anything you want us to talk about, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Cyrus, again, thank you so much for joining. It's awesome to have you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good day.